Welcome to the Mount Pleasant Podcast, featuring discussions and interviews about the people, places, and events that make Mount Pleasant such a special place.
This is the Mount Pleasant Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Cleary, and all thanks to the great people of Mount Pleasant Magazine, I get the honor, the privilege of introducing you to Mount Pleasant, the people who make it such a special place to do business, to work, and even to live. We're introducing you to Mount Pleasant's best on the Mount Pleasant Podcast. The Christmas time of year means traditions for your family. Here in the town of Mount Pleasant, the second Sunday of every December, there's a tradition that maybe you and your family are part of. It's the Town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Light Parade, and it's our subject today on the Mount Pleasant Podcast. I'm Brian Cleary. The podcast is where the pages of Mount Pleasant Magazine come alive, and on the pages of the current issue of Mount Pleasant Magazine, a good article about the Town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Light Parade, and it also talks about the history. And we thought we would delve into that history, and we're doing so with our guest today, Fred Tetor. Fred, thanks so much for taking the time to join us on Mount Pleasant Podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here.
Now, Fred, you're a retired Mount Pleasant fire chief, and you have a history that goes back with the parade. Give me a number if you can. How many Town of Mount Pleasant parades do you think you've been a part of?
Well, close to 40-some. I started with the town in 1972. At that time, the parade was a very short one, down Coleman Boulevard. Prior to that, there was a part of the parade. It was in the old village, when the police chief, Chief Benton, used to lead the parade off. So I've been with the town 30 years active, and during that time with each of the parades.
Well, tell me if you can, give me a little bit of history. So we've gone from Old Village to now Coleman Boulevard, where the parade goes for miles, more than 100 different units that are part of the parade, thousands and thousands of people. What is it that originally got you involved thinking that, well, I can help out with the parade?
Well, I was with the police department when I first came over to Mount Pleasant in 1972. I came in the month of October. I'd gone to the academy, and I was working for Chief Charles F. Dawley at the time, Chuck Dawley. And at that time, the parade was organized by a couple of departments. The police department was responsible for the safety, security, traffic control. So that was where I fell in at the first couple of years, was with the police department, helping set up the streets and the roadways, making sure it was safe for everyone. And after about 3 years, I transferred over to the fire department. And it was the fire department that was organizing the parade with help from the police department and the recreation department. So I was starting out with the three different departments working together.
Can you take us back, if you can remember a little bit about, and maybe not exactly when, but obviously the parade transitioned from Old Village to out onto Coleman Boulevard on the main thoroughfare now. What do you remember about that transition? And was it just that you guys thought, man, we can make this a bigger event?
Well, it was also, there were so many organizations that were starting to fall in. It was getting crowded in the old village for Chief Benton and the crew down there. So the parade was moved to starting at Rifle Range Road at Coleman Boulevard and going down Coleman toward Sham Creek. The parade was organized by the fire department and the recreation department with the support, as I said, from the police department. In front of Moultrie School, there was a large magnolia tree. That was the town's holiday tree. And it was lit each day by the police officer on duty. He would park his car up on the sidewalk, go underneath the magnolia tree, throw a switch, and light the tree for the evening. The officer going off duty in the morning would turn the lights off to the tree. As the floats came down Coleman Boulevard, Santa Claus would be waiting for them at Moultrie School. There was a large wooden sled maintained by the Sanitation Department. And they would paint it up and decorate it up. And the kids would come down and sit in Santa's lap, in Santa's sled. And Santa would be there for a couple of hours for the kids. So the parade broke up pretty much around the shopping center and right around the school itself. So it was still growing in size, It was still small, but it was growing in size each year. And it was becoming more professional each and every year. But there were so many trucks and flatbeds and cars decorated for the holiday that would participate in it.
Now, Fred,
So
when you were doing the parade back then, because the tradition now, of course, is that it's a night parade, was it always at night, or were there times when the parade happened during the day?
it was during the daytime. It was pretty much changed years ago. I think it was Mr. Burdett, who was the town administrator at the time, had gone to another community and seen what was going on for holidays and saw that some of the parades were being held at night. By bringing them over to the night, it was beautiful because it was just everything was lit up. To be a participant, you had to have lights on, decorations and everything. So it wasn't just a car or a pickup truck. It was a fancily decorated one.
Can't thank you enough for taking a little time to join us today. It's the Mount Pleasant Podcast, where the pages of Mount Pleasant Magazine come alive. I'm Brian Cleary, and today on Mount Pleasant Podcast, we're talking with a retired former fire chief in the town of Mount Pleasant. Fred Tetor is joining us, telling us a little bit about the history of the town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Lights Parade.
Look for Mount Pleasant Magazine's Big Red Sleigh in the Town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Lights Parade. Everyone loves a parade, especially the Town of Mount Pleasant's Christmas Lights Parade. This is Charleston's only nighttime parade. Learn how it started and watch the bands, floats, and local businesses. Visit MountPleasantChristmasParade.com, that's MountPleasantChristmasParade.com, to watch a video of the Town of Mount Pleasant's Christmas Lights Parade and learn more about the history of this awesome parade.
You're listening to the Mount Pleasant Podcast.
Now, Fred, you've been involved with the parade for decades. Have you ever yourself just been in the parade, not working the parade? Have you been on a float? Were you ever part of the parade itself?
I've been part of the parade a couple of times, a couple of different times, myself and my family participating with me and with the fire department.
So, but for most of the years, you'd be working the parade. Now, obviously they've had to change over the years. Tell us about some of the assignments that you've had and maybe some of the things that went on during the Christmas parade while you were working it.
Well, we maintained a crew of persons, both in the police and fire department, that we set up and more or less established that they were operating on bicycles for safety, security, and in case of a medical emergency. The fire department, working with the recreation department, was contacting professional float companies and persons who would rent a float for the day, coming in mainly from North Carolina. And these were large and beautiful floats with people standing on them, lights, generators running. So it was a change slowly in the parade, becoming, I would say, more professional in design, even by the schools and the businesses.
When you talk about professional floats and things like this, I think of the Macy's Day Parade with all the balloons and things. Have we ever had the floating balloons in the town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Light Parade?
Nothing of that sort. It was just trucks, cars, floats, bands, all set up through the fire department coming in and the recreation department helping set up the order of the parade. So I would assign, as I made chief, I would have people assigned to different jobs. The different battalion chiefs would have different standards that they were to meet. One was in charge of medical, one was in charge of safety and security, one was in charge of setting up the parade with the recreation. And it became necessary to change the direction of the parade once again. It started getting larger. The parade was forming at Houston Northcutt, going up Coleman Boulevard, up towards Sea Island Shopping Center, and disbanding up there. So it was almost a 1.5 mile, 2 mile parade. At the same time, the town was being decorated, and Coleman Boulevard had all kind of lights and things out, decorating the town.
So, Fred, I'm not sure you could share something with me, but hopefully you can. You've been involved with the parade many, many years. There had to be some incident, something that happened over all those years. Give me a good story. Tell me something behind the scenes that maybe most people wouldn't know about that happened during the parade that maybe you were a part of or you witnessed. Something fun, unusual, different. Anything come to mind?
The runaway horse down in Houston Northcutt that left its rider, and it just took off, and it was it was the firemen and the policemen trying to run down a wild horse on Houston Northcutt. He was finally corralled. We had one or two generators catch on fire that were powering lights on floats. I think one was a person who wanted a better view of things and stood up on a phone pole, put his feet on a box that was on the phone pole, but it was an electric box, and he put weight on the pole and the box. It all shorted out and blew out lights. Mr. Livingston, Herbie Livingston, would donate antique cars, and we would have a couple of cars with dignitaries in the parked on the side of the road that just sputtered out with their age. So not everything works smoothly.
Well, over all these years, it seems like the parade has run pretty well, except for a couple of those little bumps. Since you've been involved in this parade for so long, give me your thought on this. What is it that people love about parades? Kids, families, we'll get 20, 25,000 people on the parade route this year. Give us your feedback. What do you think it is that people love about going to a parade?
Everybody's happy and smiling and joyful. Cares seem to be gone, where people are just relaxing and having a good time. To watch the kids, to see the kids in their eyes as they see Santa Claus coming down the street. Santa rides normally on one of the fire trucks or a ladder truck, and they've decorated them up looking like reindeer, with the windows being tinted white, with big eyeballs, a basketball for a nose painted red on the fire truck. It all adds up with the kids to a great time.
We're sure that there'll be some memories made at this year's Town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Light Parade. Where might we find you this year, Fred? Will you be a spectator? Will you be on a float? Where might somebody find you? Will you be a part of this year's parade?
You will be a part of it. Years ago, the volunteer members of the fire department, with some assistance of the paid members, refurbished an old antique fire truck. And I'll be riding in a 1941 Ford fire truck.
Now, that's not going to end up being one of those vehicles like Mr. Livingston's that ends on the side of the road, right? You're driving all the way through the entire route.
Oh, this drives all the way through. This has been completely rebuilt. New motor, the transmissions have been checked, completely rewired, repainted. This is a extremely professional job for an 80-year-old fire truck.
I got to ask you about, have you got your parade wave down? Do you have a perfect parade wave?
I haven't practiced it yet. I'm sure Jennifer will teach me how to wave.
That's right.
I'd like to say one thing.
Certainly.
The parade years ago, when it started up on Rifle Range Road and came down Coleman Boulevard, there was one young boy in town that was in a very, very tenuous situation, very ill. And he couldn't make the parade. And his mother said, there's one thing that he wanted to see. And he wanted to hear and see a band play Puff the Magic Dragon. And during the parade, as the parade came down the street, I pulled my police car over to the side and backed up in the side street where they lived. Burke High School band came down the street and right in front of his house, made a right-hand turn in front of his house. And they played Puff the Magic Dragon.
Wow.
For that little boy. So there's a lot of heart from the town and from the people.
That's an amazing story, Fred. That's really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Those are the special moments that happen for the holidays, that happen during a parade. And it's so wonderful that we have such an amazing event here in the town of Mount Pleasant. And Fred, let me thank you. I know that you were a member of the U.S. military, I believe the Navy. You've served the town of Mount Pleasant for the police department, fire department, and of course retired as a fire chief. So thank you for all you've done, not just for the parade, but for all the service you've given the town of Mount Pleasant.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We look forward to seeing you on that fire truck, and we look forward to seeing you in the town of Mount Pleasant Christmas Parade, at the Christmas Parade. And we also continue to look forward to you here on the Mount Pleasant podcast and searching through the pages of Mount Pleasant Magazine. You can see Fred Tetor in this issue talking about the history of the parade in the town of Mount Pleasant. This is it, where the pages of Mount Pleasant Magazine come alive. Thank you for joining me, Brian Cleary, and Fred Tetor, our guest today on the Mount Pleasant Podcast.
Thanks for spending your time with the Mount Pleasant Podcast, your community, your podcast. Listen to past and future episodes at mountpleasantpodcast.com.